All right. How's everybody doing today? All right. Let's hear it. Okay. Excited to be here. My name is Katy Perry. If you came to see the singer, obviously, that is not I. I am a CMO at a digital asset infrastructure company called Zero Hash. I'm also writing a book about retail investors. So many of you here are the subject of what I'm working on. And I'm excited for this panel today because we're here to talk about media narratives, market psychology, the emotional, intangible aspects of trading. And I have two really, really awesome panelists here to unpack some of these concepts with us. We have Scott Clary to my left, immediately to my left, entrepreneur, investor, author. He hosts the Success Story podcast. Over 60 million downloads, right? Did I write that down? I thought that was a typo. That's a lot of downloads and a lot of ad revenue. Congratulations. And he has conversations all the time with some of the most influential, smartest entrepreneurs in the world. So we're gonna dig into that. And then to his left, we have Josh Kriger. He's a serial entrepreneur, a host, a Web3 builder. He apparently hangs out with billionaires a lot, which we learned in the green room. We'll find out about that. But he's the co-founder of Edge Company, 100K subscribers on YouTube, so no slouch as well. Guys, it's great to see you both and meet you. We were chatting a little bit in the back. Before we get going, maybe each of you, I gave a brief bio, but talk about what brings you here today, what you're working on before we get into the nitty gritty, and I'll start with you.
So first of all, thanks all for coming out and great to meet everybody here. This is now my hometown. I'm originally from Toronto, moved down to Miami, which I think is probably one of the smartest decisions I've made. But I'm interested in your world because I come from a tech background and then I turned into a media entrepreneur. And I'm so interested in your world because media heavily influences it. And I think that we have to do a better job. This is something we were chatting about sort of in like the preparing for this this talk. We have to do a better job of putting the right people on pedestals and being influenced by the right people and being careful of being influenced by the wrong people. And I kind of get like a front row seat to this every single day because I live in business influencer land. So I just love studying media. I love studying influence, and I love studying how it impacts people's life decisions, investment decisions, and I think this is like the perfect cross-section of both of these worlds, right? My business background, my investment background, plus what I do now, which is really build influence, build relationships with people online, and study other people that do it. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks, guys.
Hi, everyone. Scott, you're like my doppelganger. I also have a tech background. I had a food tech company for many years and got into blockchain in 2017 because I saw the potential sort of real-world applications which are finally coming to life. And, you know, I look at what I do at the Edge of Company, which is a mix of live events. We created NFTLA, and we created the largest Web3 event in the history of Saudi Arabia. I've done about 35 events in maybe 6 different countries over the years. And then we also have the TV show, The Edge of Show, as a way to sort of inspire the dreamers and doers and pioneers, but also to distill truth from fiction and be the adults in the room having conversations about what actually matters, which is sort of the progress of innovation to make society better. And I think that trading narratives, a lot of this gets lost, and we now know at this point that there's not a very strong correlation between tokenomics and real value when it comes to the folks that are building, which is unfortunate, but hopefully something we can dive into.
You brought up tokenomics, which I want to talk about because it reminded me of all these headlines around tokenization. And this was not the first question I was going to ask, but I'm curious, as someone building in this space, and then I'll get to you, Scott. What do you make of the tokenization of stocks and sort of where that's going? As someone who's from the crypto world, sort of the old way of trading is moving towards that. Do you think that's a net positive for traders? Are there any flags to watch out? Do you have any commentary on those headlines?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating and inevitable. That was a major topic of the DC forum I hosted back in October. We had Bill Foster, the co-chair of the blockchain caucus for the Senate, and a number of influential people. And I think it just makes sense that there's sort of some liquidity challenges we've seen with the traditional markets, and the problem, maybe you could relate, Scott, to having a meaningful stake in a private company and wanting liquidity and not being able to access it based on the mechanisms that were there before. I had on my show, it's going to air theoretically on Friday recently, a company called Hacto. And what they're launching is a really exciting token that's an index token of the 7 top private companies in the world that nobody can buy or access because they're not public. And you have a chance to sort of be part of the future of SpaceX, for example. So I think it's just anytime you give people more choices and you make those choices more sophisticated, there's a lot of challenges with small caps and crypto and small caps and the public markets. And I think giving people access to tokenization of products and services that are significant in terms of the opportunity, but maybe a little bit more risk modulated makes a lot of sense.
You mentioned something about having money locked in more traditional investment vehicles. So one example that I think about often, I'm sure some of you are familiar with the company Figure AI and the robotics and Brett Adcock, and he's killing it, absolutely killing it, great entrepreneur. I have a good friend who put in, I think, about $50,000 in an early round, and so far, he's like, on paper, it's significant returns, right? But there hasn't been an exit event yet. So that money right now is paper money till something actually happens with the company. So that's frustrating for investors, and obviously liquidity and tokens and crypto and digital assets gives an alternative where you do have a highly liquid market you can invest in, like 24/7, 365. I think that sort of my main takeaway and thesis from living adjacent to the digital asset world, meaning like I speak to, for context, I've interviewed everyone from like the founder of Netflix. I just did like a Gary Vee interview. I've interviewed probably over 1,000 entrepreneurs, several billionaires. I'm not the subject matter expert on digital assets, but I'm definitely not far from it when you deal with people at this level. And everybody plays in this space, but I think that the issue is for the average retail investor, as well as the educated, smart investor, people that have become operators, built companies, made a lot of money. They jump into things because of being influenced online, because of FOMO, and we still, in 2026, unless we've been burnt, don't value the education that is required to really truly invest and understand a more liquid market or a more liquid asset class. And I don't know how we're going to do that, because we still are at this point where people put in money, they lose it all. I think that we have to do a better job and be more loud, and the people that are more influential speak more often about how important self-education is, because that will cause a lot less harm than just people speaking about their favorite investment or their most recent investment that had a great return, but that's more of like a bias just because 9 out of 10 investments that they put money into failed. So I really think that if you are influential in this space, the more you speak about the education required to get into this space, I think that's very important. That should be more of your talk track.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I'm about 200 or 300 interviews behind you, so if you retire, maybe I have a chance to catch up. But I think I try to practice patience with myself a lot more in the current cycle, having been through several cycles and having seen that you're gonna miss an occasional 20x, but how much stress and frustration are you gonna experience if you bet an oversized bet on the one that goes to zero? And I've even changed sort of my philosophy on sort of how I work with startups and up and coming projects that I believe in, and a lot of content creators have done so because we were overcommitted to the success of smaller projects, which have just not panned out. I think we have to understand that we live in an age of innovation where it's so easy to get excited about disruptive ideas, but it's so hard to execute.
I think you touched on something really important that I want to ask you about as content creators, and that's the question of, we're 5 years anniversary from GameStop, which is insane. I feel like that was like 2 days ago. But after that, we became a lot more comfortable with sort of speculation, taking big swings. We have prediction markets now, and to your point, people are looking for those big hits, and the boring stuff is kind of existing alongside. But I'm curious, as content creators, Josh, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Scott. How do you make content that builds audiences that people want to watch, that is educational? Because I think there's a standard for entertainment value, shock value headlines that gets audiences. So how do you build that trust and keep people engaged when you're competing against, someone talking about Kelshi or something they're doing there?
Yeah, my answer to this question, I think today is different than my answer 1 year, 2 years ago. I have to admit we've adapted to the times to some degree because the YouTube algorithm is vicious. So you do need exciting thumbnails and headlines, but we don't go over the top. You just have to understand that unfortunately headlines mean everything to whether or not people watch a show. And we have over 500 episodes. My biggest fans probably are not going to watch every single episode of the show. They're gonna go to the things that excite you. So I think you have to just keep that authenticity, but still sort of develop sort of sound bites that are interesting to people, but not over the top, not clickbait. And I think it's just sort of using your best judgment in that regard, and training, in my case, training my team to sort of know how to strike that balance. But when it comes to sponsored content versus non-sponsored content, and it's not easy to make a living in media, I think the thing for me is just authenticity. I don't ever ask a question to anybody that I don't actually want to know the answer to myself. And I will ask hard questions no matter who is on the other side, and if someone the questions that need to get asked and that I'm curious about. And I've just kept that mantra throughout all of our content.
So I would say a couple things. I have a lot of opinions on this. The first, but I'll keep it short. The first thing is you have to know who you're serving and who you're not in terms of your audience. And I think you have to be laser focused on that audience avatar. I see a lot of creators just try and serve everyone, which serves no one, just in terms of like they're chasing virality, or they're just chasing like, they just want to have, they want to bring the most famous people, for example, onto their podcast just so they can say that they had all these cool people on from all these different categories or industries. I don't think that's a way to really build a strong, loyal audience. You mentioned like, how do you make sure your content hits, even if it's educational? Well, I know what my audience cares about. I know what they want to learn, and I only bring value that they care about. I'm also not really caring about people that aren't in my audience. I know that my audience is smart, my audience is educated, they care about entrepreneurship, finance, a little bit of personal development. That's what I'm serving up to them. I'm not serving them up garbage, because that's not who I want to attract. I see a lot of creators that start to go into different categories, or they do clickbait stuff, or they go into politics just to drive views. That's a conscious decision that I am choosing not to make. One more thing, just in terms of like, and I'll let you go, sorry, because I just have one more strategy to turn sort of like boring topics into content that people want to consume. So I have long form podcast on business entrepreneurship. That is the hardest thing to grow in the world, as you can attest to. Very hard to grow. So what I do is I look for different content formats that are going viral, that are working right now. So I'll look at, for example, School of Hard Knocks is one that I like to reference a lot, because they do like the man on the street style interview. It works really well. So be like, okay, so what are the things that I talk about on my podcast, and maybe I'll turn some of my interviews into that format to act as a top of funnel, because those things are hyper shareable on social, and then that top of funnel attracts a wider audience. Not everybody in that wide audience wants to listen to a 60 to 90-minute interview, but some of them do. So I think that as content creators, we always assume that like if our content's boring, we're not going to reach a large audience. There's so many people in this world. There's an audience for everything. All you have to do is find a way to attract them to your content and find your tribe, your group, your community. And that means that you have to test different formats on different platforms to act as a certain part of your funnel that will funnel people in who will eventually turn into that long-form podcast listener. But if you, for example, just assume that one style of content is going to work everywhere and you never research and you never optimize, iterate, improve, test, that's why you run into this problem of, oh, it's very hard to grow a long-form business podcast.
Yeah, it's still challenging, though. I mean, at this point, there's, I think, close to 5 million podcasts and 500,000 new podcasts every year. So the competition from when we started in 2021 to now is very significant. And I don't want to sort of, I want to underscore, it's not easy. Even if you do all these things, it's still difficult. But I also forgot to mention, I totally look at an omni-channel strategy. I'm so grateful when we started that we didn't go all in on Clubhouse like everyone recommended, or all in on Twitter Spaces when everyone recommended that. We've always taken an omni-channel strategy. Now we're experimenting with Rumble and with Zora. Follow us on Zora. I think we only have 110 followers, so we could use some more followers there at Edge of Show on Zora. But, you know, trying new things makes sense. Short clips are great. And if you're how many people in the audience are content creators? Raise your hand. Not too many. Well, I think everyone is a content creator at this point. I think it's
Sounds like it based on the number of 500,000 podcasts is way too many podcasts.
I'll tell you one more thing. If you don't create content, you should start, because it'll make whatever you're doing in this world way easier. I work with CEOs, I work with executives, I work with people that 5 years ago had zero, business creating content in their mind. And now everybody is starting to create content. Everybody's starting to become this media brand themselves.
One quick tool, Opus. If you're not using Opus, do you use Opus?
I do, but I don't use it to just post. I use it to find the best spots, and then I edit a little bit. You can explain what Opus is, but then actually one more point. For any AI tool you use for content, it'll get you to 80 to 90% of the way there, but you still have to add a human touch to it.
100%. 100%. Opus is a tool to find the best moments of content and turn it into short clips with captions. Saves hundreds of hours of editing. It's like night and day where we are with that tool.
Given there's a lot of people here on the consumption side of media, a lot of traders, I want to touch on leadership and CEOs in the role that the persona plays in your investment decisions. For the book I'm working on, I actually looked into sort of retail investors, how important the CEO, CFO, executives are to investment decisions, and they're quite important. But in my research, what was interesting is that the sort of when I had traders rank the aspects of the leader that they valued. Sort of the cool factor, the Alex Karp, the leather jackets, the, Elon Musk, like that was way at the bottom. And what was at the top was competence, trustworthiness, stability, the boring stuff. And I think we see the outliers, right, of these big celebrity CEOs, and they have these loyal followings. But when you actually talk to traders, and I'm sure a lot of you here can relate, it is about, are they deep in what the company does? Are they a thought leader? Are they steady? And so both of you have talked to so many executives. So I'm curious, as people here are probably looking at executives who are making more content, what should they be looking out for in terms of green flags, red flags? Like when you're sitting down with someone, who is someone you're like, what, I'll give this person my money? And what is someone doing where you're like, And I'll start with you. Well, whoever wants to take it first.
So I interview a ton of very successful entrepreneurs. That's really my job now. And these people have like verifiable business success. I think that if I was going to, first of all, I actually don't think you should just follow a personality and invest in a company based on the charisma, God forbid, of a CEO. However, if you were listening for tells that CEO is good at what they do, and say it's not like a company like Alex Karp with a massive market cap and you're doing small cap and you're trying to figure out, okay, is this CEO full of shit or does this CEO know what they're doing? All I can tell you after interviewing tons of entrepreneurs, just being around them a lot, is the entrepreneurs that are successful, the true operators, they are so in the weeds of their business. They are so obsessed with every nuance of their business. They can describe with like the most monotonous detail, like intricate detail, everything that's going on and how their company started and how it grew and how this problem was solved. And when, like, they will just talk for hours because they love what they've built. I'm talking about founder. I'm talking about true founder, right? Sometimes CEO is a little bit of a different breed of person, but true founder. So if you are talking to a founder and they're talking in generalities or they're a lot of hyperbole, and they don't really know the basics of what their business does or how they're going to grow their business or their CAC to LTV ratio or how all of this stuff that a true founder should know, regardless of whether it's private or public or token, it doesn't matter. I would always bet on the founder that's in the weeds and knows every single part of their business and can probably do the job, even though they've hired a great team around them, which is very important, they can probably do the job of every single person on their team to some degree. I think that is the hallmark of a great founder that I would bet on every single time, whether or not it's an angel investment or whether or not they're publicly traded.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think there's so many interesting aspects, again, of this question today relative to the past. I mean, it used to be 99% product was my philosophy, and I think product still matters. You should test the product. You should try the product for sure, and especially in our industry, blockchain, there's a lot of roadmaps and visions, and then the product is a couple lines of code. So I would add that to the mix. But in terms of founders, I'm not too surprised about that, but I think that people relate to founders in terms of how they deal with crisis. What was the exchange that had the run this past year, and the founder was very, was it? No, it wasn't Binance. It was another before that. One of the other issues, but the founder was very, very transparent, extremely communicative, and it was like one of the first times we got it right with one of those situations in a while. So I think being public with your thoughts and ideas and how you're dealing with adversity is a really critical part of building trust. Just like in a personal relationship, being vulnerable. I messed up here. Here's what I'm doing to fix it. You know, so I think that's a critical part of it. And then the other thing I'd add is a track record not only of exits. The word exit can mean a lot of different things, but exits where your investors won. That is like one of the best predictors of future success.
I think that's a great point you put on adversity. I think Cloudflare recently, they had a big outage. The CEO had a whole blog post, and what I thought was fascinating is he put his name on it. A lot of times when companies F up, there's no name on it, right? It's like corporate comms, it's PR. He was like, I'm going to sign this, I'm going to own this, and that was an important moment. So you both talked about green flags. We can get a little spicy, we're towards the end. What is something someone says or does, or even like body language? You know, you get into these people who are like ex-FBI people, and they're like, oh, he looked down into the left, he's lying. But like for you guys, when you're interviewing someone, and you don't need to name names, but you can, because that would make this a lot interesting. But like, what sets off your bullshit detector like immediately?
I don't know if it's necessarily a BS detector, but when someone has very stoic talking points that they're overly media trained, I want to get them off their seat as quickly as possible in the interview. And I think that's where like I respect the Joe Rogan style of interview, because you can only stick to your talking points so long. And so while I have done 30-minute, 40-minute interviews, I really like an hour plus, because it fundamentally changes the vibe where people run out of talking points and they have to sort of be more authentic. The other thing that we do whenever we have time is we have this fun segment called Edge Quick Hitters, where we ask us things like, what was the first thing you ever bought in your life? What's the first thing you ever sold? And we have 10 questions to get to know them better, because I think my goal with sort of an interview is to, basically uncover the humanity of the person, so you really can learn how someone thinks, not just sort of what their vision is of the company. But yeah, it's tough. I think the audience can smell inauthenticity. If that happens in an interview, I try really hard to help them by just asking questions so they could become more relatable, because I think it does a disservice to them and to the company if you come off too plastic.
So I think we're both probably fortunate at this point that I mean, at least for me, I don't get a lot of people that I can't like Google them and see what their track record is, which is obviously a huge advantage to figuring out if they're full of it or not. But I would say that one thing that I do, at least to prep for my interviews, is and to get the best content out of the guests, is I say like, hey, what are the hardest questions I can ask you that if I just asked you these questions and the audience doesn't understand that I sort of like got permission to ask these questions ahead of time, they'd be like, wow, Scott's like kind of an asshole, a little bit bold, like, like things that, what's your biggest failure? How much money did you lose on this? Whatever, what happened with this lot? Like things that are obviously uncomfortable but create great content. And I guess a red flag for me would be if somebody said there's nothing uncomfortable, no failures, because that's obviously a lie, always. And the more, we touched on this, but the more somebody is willing to lean into all the shit that went wrong, even like the highly uncomfortable stuff, the more I trust them. That's just, like, it doesn't matter how bad your story is, like, whatever's happened in the past, you're you now, I want to tell your story to the audience, but like, the audience also will get the most value if you lean into the worst parts of your story, and I think that when somebody's cool to do that, that's a green flag for me.
Yeah, it reminds me, the first speaker at NFTLA was Jiho from Axie Infinity, and the night before at 2 a.m. was the $670 million hack. And he showed up and he answered questions about that hack right away. He showed up on time. He was sweaty. He hadn't slept a lot. I don't know if his PR team cleared him to
Definitely
to
not.
do that.
I've been on the other side of that.
But like, man, like that changed the whole vibe of the conference. It changed my perspective on him because of the authenticity and boldness it took to show up.
Maybe a sensitive one for this crowd, but I think Vlad Tenev, during the GameStop stuff, if you guys have seen this clip, he went on this was before his glow up. So he goes on this YouTube show called, I think, Trillionaire Mindset. And these two guys are interviewing him. And I know one of them, they're good guys. Unbeknownst to Vlad, they were both tripping acid the whole interview. And they wanted him to basically fess up that he messed up. And they're like, why don't you just resign? And they made him wear a trucker hat that said, sorry, my bad. And it was so humbling. And there was something, even at that point when he was like a villain, there was something so endearing about these two guys who were absolutely like zooted, putting a trucker hat on him and having that conversation. I think he's an example of someone who kind of like, he really faced the music with that. So on that note, do you guys have, it could be private company, public company, do you have any CEOs or executives where you're like, that's someone I look up to, or that's sort of like a model of someone I would believe in? Does anyone come to mind?
Man, like I've had Yat Su, the chairman of Animoca Brands, on the show several times. Full disclosure, he was a lead investor in my company, but he's one of the most authentic people, I think, in the Web3 industry. And every conversation he has publicly or privately, and I've seen him interact with so many people, it's the same person showing up all the time. So I give him some credit. But your question made me remember a main stage closing fireside I did at Korea Blockchain Week with the CEO of Yuga Labs. And, he's a shyer guy. He's quite introverted. And I listened to all his previous interviews, which were all ape holders interviewing him. Like, dude, you're awesome, Bored Apes forever. And I was like, look, I think we owe it to the audience to talk about some of the difficult aspects of Yuga Labs the last few years and to have a real conversation. Are you comfortable with me asking the questions people really want you to answer? And he said, yes, let's do it.
I'm going to take this in a different direction, and you'll see why in a second, because everybody here is super ambitious, high performer, and one of the people that I had on my podcast really spoke, because I'm the same way. I could work 24/7, 365 if I could, and I'm sure a lot of us here are the same. So I had Mark Randolph, who's the co-founder of Netflix, on the show, and I respect him immensely, not because of, obviously he's built an incredible company, but what he speaks about most often is balance. And I think that this is not that kind of conference where we speak about balance often, but I always like to tell the story where while he was building Netflix, every Tuesday at 5 o'clock, he would shut off and very much on purpose, and he would go on a date and have date night with his wife. And I just love this story because it shows that, first of all, none of us, I don't think, are building anything as big as Netflix. If you are, we should talk after. I want to learn more about what you're doing. But if somebody at that level can still find balance in building an enormous company like that, I think that's a lesson that we can probably take into all of our lives. And I think that all these ambitious people in this room, we're all grinding, all pushing for the next thing, all trying to figure out, like, where do we take our careers, how do we make more money, how do we build our brand bigger, whatever. I think that is probably one of the most important lessons as we, continue on this journey.
Right on. I want to put an exclamation point on that. I've been obsessed with longevity the last year. I just did stem cells and exosomes, and for me, I think it's critical at this point where AI is taking over that it's about living a better life, not necessarily a longer life.
All right, so we'll see everyone at the bar in the Expo Lounge. All right, guys. Scott and Josh, thank you so much. What a great conversation. We'll be hanging out. Thank you, everyone here, for joining and listening in.